Hey, hi, this is BRR. In this video, we'll discuss about persistence method or load balancing, how it is impacting this load balancing with persistence method configurations on load balancer, as we have different load balancers like Citrix, Cisco, and AWS and Azure, and some of the load balancers we have in the nowadays in the software market. So, how this persistence method is being, influenced this load balancing, and what is this persistent method? Like if you look at the load balancing persistent method, what is this load balancing with persistent method? So load balancing with persistence allows you to distribute the client request across multiple servers and optimize resource utilization. So the load balancers are logically, located between client and server farm, and load balancing is used to manage traffic flow to the servers in the server farm. So this is what the load balancer like. This is the logical relation between the client and server, and basically used for optimized resource utilization among multiple web servers. That's fine. But how it is being configured is persistent method. And what is persistent method basically do? If you look at this particular the load balancer Citrix diagram, if you look at here, this is the client request. They are passing the request to the load balancer here, and from this load balancer, the requests are being passed to the server one, server two, something like this. In this particular load balancer, we'll have a configuration, a rule configuration where it has persistent a method type. So based on that, so the request and cookies and sessions being processed to get the response from the web server, consent web server. Now, so what is this basically? This persistent method is doing. Like if you look at the load balancing with persistency, it will allows you distribute client request across multiple servers, as I told you. So load balancing uses number of algorithms basically inside the load balancing, load balancing methods to determine how to distribute the request to the web server among the multiple web servers. When a load balancer is configured to use persistence-based load algorithm, so this is one kind of load balancing configuration. So if any load balancer is configured to use persistence-based load balancing, it overrides the load balancing methods or algorithms once the server has been selected. So by default, load balancer have its own algorithms. It's nothing but a load balancer methods. If you configure load balancer with persistent type, this persistent method type will override the load balancer algorithms or load balancing methods once server has been selected. If the configured persistence applies to a server that is down, then the netscaler uses the load balancing methods to select a new server. The new server becomes persistent for subsequent requests from the client. Like if you look at here, the persistent configured web server being down here is disabled here. In this time, in this context, how it is going to act is the netscaler of this load balancer comes into the picture. It uses the load balancing method to select new web server, and means server 3 here, and the new server becomes the persistent for subsequent requests coming from the first client, which acts the server 1 earlier request. So the server is selected based on the persistent method configured in the load balancer. Persistent types that can be configured as different values. Like if you look at here, these are the different values. If you look at following example, this n indicates that the persistent value based on source IP or destination IP or something being configured indication. It gives you the end user, like the admin people who is configuring this load balancer. So n represents the persistent method between these values. So there are several industries, the fact standard types of persistence, simple SSL and these source IP, destination IP rules, SSL cookies, insert URL password kind of thing. So there are advanced things and simple things. Generally, we'll speak about general things. The persistence are applicable for use with just above any publication. The more advanced forms of persistence are specific to a protocol or rely on a capability that is not necessarily standardized across load balancing servers. So if you look at this kind of persistent methods, so the simple methods are there, and the complex methods are there. Like if you look at the things which are like destination IP and source IP and SSL or URL server ID kind of things, these are the the advanced or complex methods being provided on the persistent method. So without further delay, like if you look at simple persistence, like what is the simple persistence being referred on this load balancer. So simple persistence is generally based on network characteristics, like source IP, or it can also include the destination port number to give the load balancer a bit more capacity in terms of similar simultaneous applications supported. Best practices to avoiding simple persistence to avoid reoccurrence of the merge proxy problem, which had a tendency to overheating applications instances. So network load balancing uses a simple form of persistency configurations compared to other load balancers. So this network load balancers uses the simple persistent method, that is the network characteristics, like based on the IP address. So what is this again? This SSL session ID. SSL session ID persistence became necessary when SSL was broadly accepted as the de facto for the securing traffic in the perspective of putting the SSL certificate against your request, and which is being validated at the observer level before giving the response. So because SSL sessions needs to be established and are very much tied to a session between client and server, because if you have a website where you fully dependent on session object and you are putting important and critical information on the session object, and that object is being used on other web pages which are in the same website, that time you have to configure this persistent method with the session ID. So when session is being used between client and server, failing to stick, the session secured session results in the renegotiation of the sessions, which takes a noticeable amount of time and anonymous end users reporting the problems. So to avoid unnecessary renegotiation, our load balancer uses the SSL session ID to ensure sessions are properly routed to the application instance to which they first the connected. So let us say like first request has been sent to the server 1, and similar request, similar IP address, one more request has been processed, and that request is not processed to the server 2. In this case, SSL session ID is configured as persistent method, because the method has been configured as a session ID, so it is being maintained as session ID when the first request sends a response in the URL itself, so it recognizes session ID and the relevant server IP, and it processes the similar request to the same server which first connected. So this way you will maintain session across all requests and to avoid the problems. And coming to the cookie persistency, which it is mentioning it here. So cookie persistency is a technique invented by FI form that uses HTTP cookie header to persist connections across a session. So most application servers insert a session ID into a response that is used by the developers to access data stored in the server session variable. So this value is used by load balancing service to enable persistency. This technique avoids the issues associated with the simple persistent because the session ID is unique. So if you use this cookie persistent method, it will maintain a cookie session cookie on the response header. So that way it will validate the session ID and process to the relevant server to avoid the session bouncing problems. And coming to the source IP or destination IP, or the URL passive or server ID technologies. So session ID like Windows this source IP or destination IP. Things being put it in this response header while they process the session ID, and based on that it will it will uh, act as a proxy between the load balancer and the web server to avoid these session bouncing things. So this if you look at this URL passive, this universal persistence is the use of any piece of data to persist a session. This technique requires a load balancer to be able to inspect and ultimately extract any piece of data from a request or response. This technique is the basic basis of application specific persistence solutions addressing popular applications like source IP and the universal persistence, and recently VMware View kind of thing persistent methods. So this way the load balancing will handle things based on the persistent methods here. So numerous persistent methods being placed here. So if you look at the example, like how the requests are delivered as follows. So the first request is sent to the server 1 or server 2. or server 3 based on the configured load balancing method. The subsequent requests are also sent to the server based on the persistent value n and are sent to the same server that was selected, thus persisting the connection. So this way will be persisting the connection and maintain the same session across all the the web request, like not only across the single browser different request sent to the load balancer. This way will avoid session bouncing and definitely problems of session when the application is being used purely on session object from the first request. So this is what the persistent methods types available in the load balancer. So this way will maintain the connection as persistent for the web request. So this clears like what is the persistent method types in load balancing, how they are being configured and how they are working when request comes from the client to the browser, because the load balancing is nothing but a logical relation between the client and server, so which are in the web form. So uh, we have numerous methods and the gaps between the cookies and sessions when the application is being used, how they are maintaining kind of thing. So with this persistent method, definitely we'll see like what is suitable for your application. Same thing can be configured and you can get the response very appropriately and to avoid session bouncing problems. So hope this clears like what is persistent method. Thanks for listening this, and please watch uh, this YouTube channel for more videos on this. Please subscribe. Thank you.